Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas, the statewide nonprofit advocate for the preservation of Arkansas's historic places. Welcome to Women in Preservation, our series that features women who are working to save historic places. I want to thank our sponsor of Women in Preservation this year, DMX Architecture of Fayetteville, for their generous support. Many of you are members of Preserve Arkansas, and we appreciate your support. If you're not already a member, I'd like to invite you to formally join us for as little as $50 a year. Your membership is so important to the work that we do. Learn more and join at preservearkansas.org. Preserve Arkansas is now accepting nominations for the 2024 Arkansas Preservation Awards. The awards recognize outstanding preservation achievements, people who make a difference in their communities, and projects that inspire people to save Arkansas's historic places. Learn more about the awards and nominate your projects and people on our website at preservearkansas.org before August 31st. Join us for the next Mid-Mod Arkansas tour in Hot Springs, Arkansas on September 27th and 28th. This tour will feature the work of Hot Springs architect I. Granger McDaniel, whose designs transformed much of the city during the mid-20th century. Learn more and get tickets on our website. Join us on August 13th for a program by Keontae Key Fletcher, director of the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center in Little Rock. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Amanda Edwards. As MTFA's lead architectural conservator and associate principal at MTFA, Amanda's experience includes historic material research and condition assessments for the preparation of condition assessments, treatment plans, historic structure reports, and construction documents. This range of skills includes mortar analysis, paint analysis, masonry cleaning and stabilization, materials testing, and building surveys. Amanda is a professional associate with the American Institute for Conservation. Her extraordinary effort and passion for conservation has been recognized with multiple awards on projects such as the historic Folger Shakespeare Library, the Cannon House Office Building, and the Cosmos Club in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And I'm going to start my screen here and let me share. All right. And let's start the program.
I don't see, oh, there we go. Okay.
There we go. Can everybody see that?
It looks good.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be able to share some recent projects with all of you and help explain a little bit about what an architectural conservator does. So as Rachel said, I am a senior architectural conservator and associate principal at MTFA Design and Preservation. We have offices in Arlington, Virginia, and on Capitol Hill, which is where I am right now talking to you. And this is one of our logos, which shows some of the diverse character of work that we do throughout the office. So I know that one of the first questions that I get is, how did you get into this career and where did you start? And I'm showing you a picture here of Monticello in Charlottesville, Virginia. And when I was a kid, my parents took me, on a weekend trip to see Monticello. And there was this exhibit where they had artifacts from around that they dug from the ground around the slave quarters. And I was so fascinated that you could dig in the ground, find something, and learn about history. And that whole concept seemed crazy to me, but I thought it was really cool. And so I kind of grew up thinking that I wanted to be an anthropologist. But then I went to college and I realized that I don't really like digging in the dirt. But I do like studying cultural anthropology, trying to understand how cultures change and adapt over time, and what the needs are that causes them to change. And I'd learned that my favorite way of studying that mechanism was through architecture. So I didn't have preservation. I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and preservation wasn't a category that I could study, but they did have anthropology and architectural history. And I decided to combine the two into what I thought was the anthropology of architecture, but little did I know that that was really historic preservation. So this is a photo of the Skinker de Bolivar neighborhood, which is a streetcar suburb in St. Louis, and it was filled with these really large houses for large families, I think 7, 8 kids. But the people living in them when I was there did not have 7 and 8 kids. They had 1 or 2 kids, and most of them were professors. And they were kind enough, some of the professors, to let me into their building and draw floor plans and ask them questions about, what do you use this extra room for? And I really enjoyed trying to understand the evolution of these buildings over time. And that study kind of turned into this analysis of public versus private space. So I moved back to Washington, D.C., and I cold called a preservation firm in the city called EHT Traceries, and they were doing a lot of reconnaissance surveys and National Register nominations, historic districts, things like that. And they hired me to answer phones or, help out here and there. I was just a new graduate, didn't have a lot of skills. And but one of the things that they assigned to me was to work on the teams that were doing the reconnaissance surveys of countywide projects. So this is a GIS map showing all of the historic resources in Baltimore County, which was one of my first projects. And we didn't have GIS back then. We were using USGS maps. And I wouldn't say that I surveyed all of these buildings, but I certainly did a couple hundred of them. And we would go out in the field and try to characterize quickly, the date, the materials, the architectural style. And all of this was to try to figure out what the development trends were in the county. Were there any areas that could be turned into historic districts? Was there some architectural resource that the county didn't know of? So the ones that are starred here are ones that are on the National Register. So I quickly grabbed my Field Guide to American Houses, my McAllister, and made a lot of note cards and tried to memorize house styles and really try to learn how to survey buildings quickly. And I would say it was an invaluable lesson in understanding the development of architecture. So when it came time to get my master's, most of the people that I work with went to the University of Pennsylvania. And they said, this is where you have to go. You can, you'll get a great education there and then you'll be on your way. And I applied, I got in, and then I got to study in this amazing library on Penn's campus. This is the Fisher Library, which was designed by Frank Furness. And what an incredible and inspiring place to study. And while I was at Penn, I really learned about conservation, the science of conservation. The program was a master's of science in historic preservation. And I realized that I enjoyed the science behind it. I like the chemistry. I like understanding how materials deteriorate and then how do you fix them, all those compatibility issues. So fast forward, after I graduated with my master's, I got a job with John Milner Associates in Alexandria, Virginia, and have been working with them. Now we've merged with MTFA it's been about 10 years since we merged with MTFA. And through that experience, I've been able to work on many of Washington's iconic buildings, but also been able to work across the country. So sometimes people ask me, what's an ideal day? What do you love most about your job? And I look at all of these projects that I've been able to work on, and the one at the cathedral really sticks with me because this was a building that I grew up near. It didn't live that far away. It was completed in my lifetime, and it is just this incredible space. And I got to do a condition assessment where I went into every single space in the entire cathedral, on the roofs, looking at the pinnacles, looking at all the individual chapels and hidden staircases. And there was so much to learn because it had evolved slowly over time. And you're looking at, there's a history of the technology of sealants on this building, for example. And I just really love being in the space and learning. And I try to learn something every single day when I'm out in the field. So when we start a project at MTFA, we always try to treat this building with respect and understand, what are the needs of the project, of course. We are well versed in the Secretary of Interior standards, and those are our guiding documents. But we also look to the documentation of the existing buildings and try to understand really what was that original architect's design intent. And so that combined with those Secretary standards really give us the true path of what it is we need to do to restore these buildings. So then I come in on this hands-on investigation, and I help to understand different mechanisms, whether it's how the stone is deteriorating, or the paint analysis to figure out what the room might have looked like originally, to all kinds of different analytical testing to solve water infiltration issues. And then we pull all of these investigations and our philosophies and treatment approach together into one document to help the client understand what the next steps are. And then we help them prioritize the different levels of work in order to accommodate their budgets. These photographs are from the Cosmos Club, the Warren Ballroom in Washington, D.C. And it starts with the historic photograph from about 1915 to the condition of the ballroom when we were asked to start the restoration in progress next, and then finally is the restored room. And I'll go into a little bit of that in a minute. So what kind of testing do we do in this hands-on investigation? So paint analysis is a fun one, and I'm going to give you an example of one of those projects where we're taking little cross sections of wood trim or various plaster elements to try to understand the history of paint and what could the room have looked like when it was first constructed. We also do a lot of building survey, so I'm out on marble facades, stone facades, sounding and counting cracks, as they like to call it. We also do things like Rylam tests, where we're looking for permeability to understand how does that mortar function within the wall, how are the bricks functioning within the wall. We also create patch protocols. So this in the lower left is an example of an exposed aggregate building, and we were able to create a patch that matched it almost exactly so that you couldn't see all of those interventions that we had to make. And then I'm lucky that we have our own lab, and so we can do some of this in-house, in our everyday office. So I wanted to start off by being local to Arkansas. So, the preservation director in our office is from Arkansas and has brought us out there to do a couple projects. And I just wanted to show a little bit about one of the projects at the Wilhoff House. This is in Van Buren. And you can see it circled there in the town of Van Buren. It's right next to the Arkansas River. Leonard Wilhoff was, had worked as a baker in Van Buren, and the house that we were able to work on was a dog trot house that we think was constructed somewhere in the 1840s. So here's the example of the house as it looked when we started. And then for those who might be familiar with Van Buren, this is right down the street from the Drennan Scott House, which we also worked on. And both of these are owned by the University of Arkansas. So John Mott, who is our preservation director, worked tirelessly to try to understand the evolution of this building. And he asked me to do the paint analysis, which served a couple of different purposes. One was to try to figure out this evolution. We were able to use paint layers to try to date, were these two rooms, were they contemporary with each other? Did they have different paint that told us that maybe one was earlier or one was later? And then also the paint analysis would help inform what the building original design might have looked like. So there was a complicated evolution from 1840 with the true dog trot. Then there were additions that were put on, and then even further in 1855, there was an L. That L was removed I think in the 1950s. And then there was this other parallel L that was put on in the 90s, which has now since been removed. But looking at the paint analysis, I want to show you and point you to, let's see if I can get this to work. Point you to this nice bright pink color here, and you'll see it's right next to the wood substrate, helping us understand that it's perhaps one of the first colors that was used on the building. And then here you can see the different schemes that we identified for various elements. And so this is what the restored building looks like now. And yes, it is that bright orange color. And this isn't the earliest color, but we felt that it reflected the color of the building when it was in the current form. So in probably about the 1860s, when it got to this shape. So that's just a fun example local to Arkansas that I thought I would share. So talking a little bit more about paint analysis, because this is fun. The process is really, you go out and you take little samples from different elements, whether it's wood trim or plaster or whatever needs to be, or brick, whatever needs to be analyzed. We mount them into these resin cubes and polish them. And then we look at them under the microscope, and we're able to define the different stratigraphy or the different layers. And from there, after you look at a bunch of them, you can try to decide, is there something unusual? Is there any kind of decorative treatment that we might want to see? And if there is, then you would do an exposure window where you gently scrape away the paint and try to see what that original finish may have been. So we can also go even further, and this is in our office, we can do UV, which really helps us to understand the different layers. It's another way of looking at it that's not in the natural light. We can also do polarized light, which could help to identify different binders, as well as X-ray diffraction, which can tell us different metals like gilding that might be involved. And then even further, the scanning electron microscope, which gets really close in there. And you can also do some diffraction in there as well to figure out the elements. So you can go really far, or you can stay, you know, closer toward just understanding what the colors are. So why would you do the paint analysis? Sometimes it could be on the exterior of a building to understand what that Victorian paint scheme might have been. This is the Woodrow Wilson family home in South Carolina. Or it could be to find gilding. It could be to find a wood finish. This is at a bank in DC. And then going back to the Warren Ballroom at the Cosmos Club, it could be to try to understand what those colors were intended to look like. So on the left, you see that there had been this history of sort of painting as the white got darker and dirtier, it was repainted that dirty color and then repainted the dirty color and until it just became something totally different from the intended appearance. And once we were able to clean the paintings and the tondo and then come back to these original colors, you can see how harmonious that original scheme was. And that's what I always say, when you do paint analysis right, it feels right. You can just tell that you got it right. So this is an example of a paint analysis that was super complicated. St. Elizabeth's probably was one of the most complicated buildings projects I've ever worked on. This is in Washington, in Anacostia. It is on a hill that overlooks the federal city. And this building, which is a massive hospital, was the first and only federal hospital for the insane. So the building was threatened with neglect. It had been closed in the 90s, and, you know, lots of different preservation interests tried to figure out how to save this building, but because it had such a unique footprint, it was hard to figure out who could use it. So the Department of Homeland Security said, well, you know, we need that much space, but we're going to have to change the program. These are some historic photos of what the building looked like during its heyday as the hospital. And here's this footprint, and it has this, what they call the Kirkbride plan, which allowed sunlight to permeate through all of the wings. And each of these little rooms are patient rooms. And so it was seen as, you know, a way to provide a comfortable environment for all of the patients. But Department of Homeland Security says we can't have that many little offices. And so it was also determined that the existing structural system couldn't withstand the new program that the Department of Homeland Security wanted. So I'm going to shock you with this next picture, but just real quick, this is the evolution of the building. It started in 1855 in Building 3. Then we went to Building 1 by 1859, to Building 4, 1860, back to Building 5. Then in 1874, this new end of the building was added on. And then eventually in about 1900, the full form was developed. So all of the government, the preservation regulatory agencies got together and said, okay, if you can't use the interior of the building, we at least need to save the shell. And this is what happened. So the entire exterior was preserved and supported while the interior was completely taken out. But just going back for 1 second, my job was to, at this intersection of the building, which is designated in red as a restoration zone, my job was to help remove all of the historic trim, doors, windows, help to understand the different plaster finishes, so that they could be either reinstalled or recreated in this restoration zone. And part of that was to do a paint analysis so that this section of the building could then be repainted to match the original design intent. So very overwhelming, a little daunting, but we had a little bit of help. So there are great photographs from 1905 that showed what the interior of the building looked like. And you can notice that there are areas of stenciling and wallpaper. And this is what the building looked like when we did our survey and our paint analysis. It had, like I said, it had been boarded up for many, many decades at this point. So we started on the paint analysis, and there's a couple of things that I look for when I do a paint analysis. One is a benchmark. This part of the building was done in the around 1859, and this one was done in 1874. But these inner samples, which are from building 1, and the outer samples, which are from building 2, perfectly lined up, almost exactly, which showed that none of the original finishes from 1860 remained in this portion of building 1. So we knew that everything we were looking at was dating to at least 1874. In other parts of the building, we found this specific primer that had the red and blue bulking agents in it. And that helped us to think that, and we didn't find that in the 1874 building. So that helped us to identify that this was older and perhaps related to the 1859 finishes. And indeed, you can see this primer and then the brown of the stencil from this area. So we know that that was an early finish. And then in some of the rooms, as you can see, there was a lot of decoration, and the remaining paint and fragments of paint showed different eras. We had stenciling, we had wallpaper, we had full flocking of the walls. And this paint sample shows all of those layers. It shows the blue stencil, it shows the wallpaper, and it shows this red layer. So all of these things helped us to understand, with the help of the photographs, what we were looking at. So this wallpaper dates to this era, which was seen in 1905. So those are some of the things that we use to date our analysis, which is pretty cool. Okay, so I'm gonna just sort of speed through this part now. We got to all of the color palettes for that center cross of the building from 1859, and each of these reflect different rooms. And I want you to focus on these sort of pink and mauve colors over here. And then this is what we determined that color scheme would have looked like. And each wing had a different color scheme, which this is the chestnut wing, this is the maple wing. And then this is what some of the rooms would have looked like, these beautiful, mid 19th century jewel tones. And again, once you see it, you see how it makes sense when you understand the trends of the time. So, funny story, I was talking with my neighbor who was a Capitol Hill staffer, and telling her about this paint analysis and some of the things that I was finding. She's like, oh, they're doing some restoration of the Bermuda corridors in the Capitol. You should come for lunch and we'll check it out. And I was like, oh, I would love to do that. And it turns out that T.U. Walter, who was the architect of the Capitol at the time that these corridors were being painted, was also in charge of building St. Elizabeth's. And what I determined because I had done the paint analysis at this point, and you can see these pinks and mauves and these greens and blues, and you look at what is done in the Capitol, and it's all the same colors, but it's just the level of refinement that's different. So this is something that, with great artistry and flourish, that was done in one of the most important buildings in the country. And then you take those same colors and you do them more on a simpler version for a federal building that was done on a budget. And I think there's probably a lot more to unpack there, but I thought that was really interesting. Some more samples that we found. This is the exterior. This is a sanded paint that was intended to look like stone. So we determined that it was found on all of the trim and the cast iron, and we were able to recreate that finish in our lab. And then this is what the final product looked like, and you can see how close it is to the brownstone trim, that the true brownstone trim that exists on the building. Again, just real quick, this is the rendering just to show the scale of the building. This is me inside the building once they had taken everything out. And then this is the final appearance after the restoration. And then this is the actual interior following that color scheme, and all of that restored woodwork that was put back, and the plaster that was recreated, reconstructed to match the original. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a different project. This is another project that's close to my heart. This is the Folger Shakespeare Library. It's a project I've been working on for a number of years. It is stripped classical building. It was designed by Paul Philippe Cray in 1932. We were contacted to help them clean the exterior of the building to get rid of this black stain that was around the perimeter. We had lots of different theories. It turns out that there was a lead-coated copper flashing right at this level. The lead had all worn off and the copper was exposed to the elements. And so the black stain that you see is actually all copper. It can turn purple over time. Starts out green like everybody knows, but indeed it can turn black. So we did a really intense hands-on investigation to try to understand how can we clean this building and how can we do it over an entire building, not just one little area. And we started out with poulticing, which would be the common approach. And here we started and we got 0 results. Then we went to misting to try to open up the pores of the stone so it could receive the treatment better. Still wasn't doing everything it needed to do. So then we did microabrasive to try to get that surface scum off so that when the poultice was applied, it could get deep penetration. And this little tiny square is what gave me hope. We did it. We did it in the sequence of power washing, misting, and then microabrasive, then the poultice. And in that exact sequence, we got success. And so from that little tiny square, I said, okay, I think we can do this. And then we started to try to apply it to the whole building. And we created a spray system for spraying on the poultice material. And we determined that it needed to be on 2 applications, needed to be wet for 24 hours, the poultice, and then you need in covered, and then we needed to take it off and let it dry for 48 hours and then do it again. And here you can see that the success, this is a cleaned area and this is the stained area. So we were really able to get it all out, and it was just incredible. And this is just some of the photos of our different levels of testing, trying all different kinds of poulticing chemistries to see what was going to work the best. And this is what the stone looks like under the microscope, stained and then cleaned. We also did some work on the bas-reliefs where they had been treated before and consolidated in various areas. All of this stone is Georgia white marble. And they were not this orange. This is actually a treatment. This is the biocide. When biocide is working, it turns bright orange, but eventually it gets to be clean. So don't freak out if your stone turns orange when you put some D2 on it. And this is the final result. So here we have the sequence, the historic 1932 image, the stain from when we started, halfway through where we realized that we had a winner on our hands. and then the final result, which was truly remarkable. We did a lot of masonry repair also. There was some work that needed to be done to replace corroding steel shelf angles. But that's almost a whole nother talk. But you can't tell, even in this photo, how much of the strategic stone removal that we did. And we removed whole swaths of this, but we put it all back in areas to match the existing coursing. And we salvaged as much as we possibly could. So then, after we had the building pristine, the Folger decided to embark on their new museum project. So if I go back a few slides to this terrace, they decided that they wanted to open this space up for their new museum space and provide some accessible entries. And this was really nerve-wracking because I had just restored this whole building. And then they opened up, they trenched this all out, and they were supporting the entire facade on these jacks. They did an incredible job, very little damage. I mean, no damage, but very little movement to the joints that we just repaired. Really an incredible feat. And then we put in this protection of the bas-reliefs so that they were breathable, but protected from any impact from the construction. So my role was really to help the owner protect the existing historic fabric. And one of the cool things, this is a close-up of those jacks, which is amazing. One of the cool things that I got to do was go to Vermont and help pick out new marble for the terrace. The existing marble was not reusable, and for the most part. And we found a good stone match in Vermont. And we went up there and we selected different stone blocks based on their level of veining that we thought would match. And then once all the stone was cut to size, they laid out the entire terrace. And my job was to help rearrange all the different tiles so that the pattern was as even as possible. And if you look at this slide right here, we tried to put the stones that were darker or had the deepest patterning up against the building so that when you were perceiving the building from the terrace or from the ground, you couldn't see that the darker stones, it was all more the light stones. So that was a really conscious decision. And this is what it looked like installed. So I think it was very successful blend of the old and the new. We also did a lot of work on the interior. The Folger has incredible Elizabethan inspired interiors, which again is a whole nother talk. And if you're ever in Washington, I encourage you to come visit. We did a lot of work on the aluminum and stained glass windows, as well as a lot of aluminum trim around the whole building. This is me at the reopening, which is very exciting. And then this is what it looks like now with the new entries. Just really stunning work that was done to add this new museum space. Okay, checking my time. It looks like I have time for one more project. This is the Commandant's House at the Washington Marine Barracks. This is a building that dates to about 1801. It's one of the oldest in our city because it survived the burning of Washington in 1814. And this is where the Commandant of the Marine Corps lives. It is also, it's probably better known from the other side. This is from the parade ground within the Marine Barracks. And you'll notice it has that nice double bay on the back. So our purpose for this project was to help them do a preservation plan as they were beginning to develop a new mechanical intervention, replacing all the mechanical systems. And they wanted to be able to do that sensitively and effectively, but they needed to know what were the restoration zones. We did a full inventory of all of the different character defining features of the original architecture. And we were able to complete a full design as the architect lead for that MEP upgrade. Part of that was to try to understand the evolution of this building. So starting in 1801, you have this center core. It gets added onto in various ways over time. And this was one of the fun things that we get to do too, is while we're exploring, we're really researching and trying to understand the evolution of a building and why does it look the way that it does. So here's an early photograph of the back before it has its porch from the parade ground. And then later when it gets a new addition on top of those double bays. And we had heard a rumor that people thought some of those double bays may have been added in the 1840s, but we found an example of an almost identical building in the Boston Navy Yard that had the exact same double bays, and this one was dates to 1805. So here's some more photographs, just scrolling through. So to get to the conservation part of this, so we are in the basement of the building in that red historic core, and we noticed when we were investigating for all of the different upgrades that were going to happen to this building, that right above this ceiling tile, there was a lot of brick dust, and like an excessive amount of brick dust. And here, I'll show you the picture. Like, where did this brick dust come from and what was going on? So we did a lot of tests. We opened up the walls and we found that we had known that there was a 1-inch thick concrete parging that was put over these walls as a stabilization effort, actually, to help the structural support. And but what it was doing was actually trapping the moisture, and as that moisture was rising up the wall from the pressure of the coating, it was evaporating right at that ceiling height, where the first point where it could be released. And so we determined that perhaps there wasn't really a water table or a damp course that was preventing the water from rising above the water table. We did moisture readings, and we determined that it was really saturated. In areas that hadn't been treated with the concrete, it was really dry. So something was happening that was related to this coating. We did absorption tests. These bricks are 1801. They are highly absorptive, probably all hand molded, right? So we wanted to do some geotechnical testing to try to understand if there was any clay under these walls, or what was the soil content at the foundations. And we indeed found clay, but we also found this, which was a cellar that nobody knew about, that had been filled in. And you can see some of the whitewash there on the bricks. So that led us to a whole nother set of diagnostics and conclusions that we needed to take all of this fill out, get that cellar open back up, and start putting some air in there so that we could dry out this wall, because we can't take off the purging because it would damage the brick. So one of the other things that I get to do is help create design details to make sure that the historic materials are treated and as stable as possible. And this is a fairly complicated design, but we are installing a pretty cool damp-proof course using bladders in the wall. We've got air systems that are circulating in the cellar region so that we can dry out this portion of the wall. And then we're waterproofing over here to make sure that we're not bridging anything with any new soils that are put in. So just some of the wide range. So from paint analysis to building surveys to architectural details, It's just been pretty incredible. And again, I would say that, it's about learning every day, something new, something that you didn't know before, that really propels my interest in my career. And then I'll just end with this. Hopefully this is gonna work. Let's see. Can you guys still see my screen? Yeah. So
Yes.
lately we are working on a number of different sculptures, and we're trying to understand the latest technologies and how we can use them to do preservation. So with Direct Dimensions, we had a laser scan done of the Tripoli Monument at the U.S. Naval Academy. So this is an incredible tool for documentation. I can zoom in, and we did a really high level of detail, so you can see all of that carving. You can see the stains, the level of cracking. And yeah, this right now, I think we're working on 3 or 4 different statues. So again, another whole new area to learn about and to see how we can keep these structures for many more generations. And I think that's it for me. Should we open up the floor to questions, Rachel?
Yes, absolutely. If you have questions, then please type them in the chat or the Q&A. You've got a couple comments in the chat right now of people telling you did a great job.
Oh,
and I'll share the chat with you too, the chat file.
let's see.
Everyone's enjoying seeing all your photos and the projects. Okay, here we go. A question. What are a couple recommendations that you'd share with an owner of a historic building before they start making alterations? Just a couple.
Yeah, I mean, that is, it really depends on each one, but it's, you want to understand what your building materials are and know that compatibility, like, making sure that whatever you're using isn't going to cause more damage to your materials is one of the most important things. And so, it really depends on what the issues are, but if you have moisture issues, those definitely need to get addressed because they're going to cause more problems in the future. If you have if you're making alterations, you want to understand your structural system, make sure that it can handle it, and really kind of understand what's old and what's new and what needs to stay and what could be sacrificed. I think having a good understanding of that decision tree would really go a long way.
Thank you. That's great advice. Okay. So question, concrete on older soft brick is really bad, right? And I would just like to add in, whenever you were talking about that, I was thinking about several conversations that we've had recently with people around the state trying to provide as much information about why you don't paint historic brick that's never been painted. So if you could address both of those, why is it so bad?
Yeah, well, so in this case, it wasn't necessarily bad because, it was done as a way to stabilize these soft brick walls at a foundation. So I'm not saying that it was the wrong choice. I am saying that it caused unknown, unforeseen conditions that then had to be dealt with, right? So typically, yes, you don't want to put in hard Portland cement in your joints. Anything that's going to affect the breathability. How water moves through the wall is super important. And really hard cements are not breathable. And therefore, all of the moisture then breathes through the bricks and the stones that you're trying to save, which causes the damage. So having breathable mortars is certainly much better. Add in a structural component into this, it gets a little bit more complicated, and I'll let structural engineers weigh in on that. But in this case, what we determined was that you really needed to dry these walls out so that it wasn't damaging the walls by moving that moisture up and causing that disintegration. That was not good. in terms of painting bricks that have never been painted, it goes a long way to the whole sandwich of the wall system. You need to understand, again, is there a cavity wall? Is there not a cavity wall? Older structures don't have cavity walls. It's solid masonry. So how moisture moves in and out is really important. And in our climate, in the mid-Atlantic, we have a lot of freeze thaw. So if you trap moisture in that wall and then you paint it and nothing can get out, then you're potentially opening up for brick spalling because that moisture is going to freeze and pop. You know, there are plenty of breathable masonry coatings out there that can be used and can be done in a compatible way. So it's not to say that, you know, all paints are bad. It's really just understanding. It's complicated. It's what's your exterior environment, what's your interior environment? Is it climate controlled? How is that moisture moving through the wall in such a way that it won't cause damage if it comes in, or won't cause damage if it goes out, and you're stabilizing that wall structure, if that makes sense, before you add things on it that would impede how that moisture moves.
Yes, thank you. So everyone knows, if you're interested in historic preservation, I hope you know that there's a nationwide shortage of craftspeople who are trained to do historic preservation. How does that impact the work that you do? Whenever you go in and you make your recommendations to do these different conservation, measures, then do y'all have a problem finding contractors who can do this?
So in a large metropolitan area, it's a little easier, but I will say that, like I said, I like to learn every day, and a lot of that is learning from contractors when I'm on a construction site. So doing construction administration, or I'm learning from them sometimes what's the right way to do it, and then I'm taking that knowledge and I'm passing it on to the next person that I work with that may not know that, and or putting that information into my documents. And then, one of my favorite things to do is to walk with the contractor before any work starts and talk about the methods and talk about the process, and, build a level of trust so that if a problem arises, they don't just hide it, but we address it and we try to figure out the right way to deal with it. And I think as long as tradesmen, as long as you maintain that level of curiosity and, seek to learn how to do the right thing, I think you'll find there are a lot of people that are interested in pursuing careers that way. If you're working with contractors that are under the pressure of schedule and budgets, it gets a little bit more complicated, and it's really about sharing knowledge as much as possible to help them meet their goals.
Thank you. You have some more comments, which I'll send to you. But I loved the tour that we went on of the Folger Shakespeare Library in March. So thank you again for taking our preservation action group through back in March. There were obviously many challenging things about that project, but do you have like a favorite part of the project or a favorite part of the building? And for anyone who hasn't been there, it's just a block from the Capitol and you have to go see it. But anyway, Amanda.
Yeah. Gosh, there are so many challenges. One of them, they had to move the tree. There was a heritage magnolia tree, and they had to move it like 5 feet in another direction so that they could have that underground or that below grade entry. We had to do a lot of work with the fountain. So there used to be a fountain on the west side, and I encourage the Folger to salvage as much of that stone from the fountain as possible. And they were able to reuse it and recreate a new fountain in the same space. But with some of the salvage that we have, that they had, they could then repair stones in the future. they also use them for some of the new features. And so, you know, if you have a lot of building material and you're going to be maintaining your building for decades, it's always a good idea to have an attic stock. So that was great to be able to learn. You know, we learned a ton on working on the windows. They were all custom done with these with these levers that we understood why they were getting stuck all the time. We were able to undo all of that. So it's just, the thing I like about these projects is that it's never boring. There's always something different. And you know, it's hard to say where I learned one great thing over another great thing. It's just, I just absorb it all, right? It's really great.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your excellent presentation. We really appreciate you being here with us today. And thank you all for watching, and we hope to see you next month. Bye,
Great. Thank you
everybody.
all so much.
Thank you. Bye, Amanda.
All right. Bye-bye.